Stop killing games. Let's hear what Pirate Software has to say about this, because I'm in agreement with him. Can we stop killing games? Will the AAA industry learn or listen? Doubt, but we'll see. Pax, how you doing?
Hi, my name is Jason Thor Hall, also known as Pirate Software Online. I've been in the gaming industry for about 20 years. I used to work at Blizzard Entertainment, then Amazon Game Studios, and now I own my own studio, Pirate Software, by the same name, which is an indie studio, and I've been here for about 8 years now. I also run a massive community. We've got about 180,000 people in Discord, and most of what I do is try to teach other people how to make games, teach them that they can make games, show them the tools to do so, and try to do everything without any paywalls or bullshit in the way. It's incredibly important to me that we keep making games and that the next generation has the tools to do so that our medium doesn't die out. And it never will. And that's the whole intention of all of this. So with that in mind, that community brought me this and tried to get me to sign it. And I don't want to. Number one, I can't because I don't live in Europe. But number two, I wouldn't sign it even if I could. And I'm going to kind of go through this and try to explain the reasoning as to why that would be the case, without all of the internet hate machine that's grown up around it. So let's go into how this works and why this is an issue to me. First things first, what is an initiative? So an initiative is actually not law. It is something that you put together so you can put it up in front of representatives and they can start the conversation. The reason why I have a problem with Stop Killing Games is specifically it starts the wrong conversation. If we're trying to kill off the practice of developers putting together a live service game, pitching it as a single-player experience, and then taking away support in the future, this ain't it. And the reason why is specifically on this initiative, under its own description, it says, this initiative calls to require publishers that sell or license video games to consumers in the European Union or related features and assets sold for video games they operate to leave said video games in a functional playable state. Specifically, the initiative seeks to prevent the remote disabling of video games by the publishers before providing reasonable means to continue functioning of said video games without the involvement from the side of the publisher. This isn't always possible in all video games, and it doesn't call out the specific practice that this is supposedly trying to defeat. It is incredibly vague, and will...
I'm assuming he's problem here, because the logic behind this kind of makes sense to me. From a logical perspective, I fully understand and agree with him. I think it's disgusting that you have games that come out that, people love, even though not everyone loves it, not enough people to keep the game going, but then it just disappears, right? So I fully understand the idea that they're going for here. But what I will say, what I think his problem probably is there are games out there that you can't keep it playable, right? It would not work without official servers, without official, and also probably code that you really can't share in that way. So I'm assuming that's going to be his problem here. And this will, because governments tend to be like a catch-all thing, so it can create some serious trouble for video game publishers in the future. As one take, if an MMO shuts down, it should be officially allowed to create private servers. That I agree with. I think I agree 100% with Asmon on that take. I'm just trying to figure out what he's saying, because from my understanding, at least thus far, I can see why he would have a problem with the exact language that's being used here. Because the language suggests that even games that physically can't be kept up unless it is official, this would force them to keep it up, which would suddenly mean that if you're a developer that is trying to make something new, like some new MMO or some new multiplayer game, you're probably not going to fucking do it, right? Because if you tell me, I'll give you guys an example of what is happening in South Africa right now. People love to talk about labor laws, right? And how good labor laws are and how good unions are. In South Africa, it is almost impossible to fire someone once you've hired them. The firing process is ridiculous. So the first time you catch them doing something wrong, you have to give them a verbal warning. Then you have to give them a written warning. Then you have to give them a final warning. Then you have to give them a letter of receipt or a letter of something. I can't remember exactly what it's called. But that then triggers a hearing. The hearing is then done with I can't remember their name now, but they're basically the company that oversees the labor law. that hearing is then held with a representative from the labor law department that comes out and they hear it. If they decide that the person didn't do something bad enough to get fired for, you physically cannot fire this person and the person has to start over with 3 new warnings because the person did their offenses weren't egregious enough to actually fire them. So basically, you can't fire someone once you've hired them in South Africa. What this has led to, the unforeseen consequence of this, is that no one hires anyone that doesn't have a degree. If you don't have the degree for the thing, you will not get hired. Why? Because if I hire you and you're not good at what you do, I can't fucking fire you. Because the labor department says if the person that you hired isn't good enough at the job that you hired them for, you have to pay to send them to training so that they can learn how to do the job. What if they're just a bad worker? What kind of training is there for that? So it becomes a whole thing. You get why the government wanted these rules in place. They wanted to protect workers from people taking advantage of workers. But the unforeseen consequence of this is now these very workers that were meant to be protected by the government aren't even getting a job so that they can be protected by the government, because I'm not going to take a chance hiring someone if I can't fire them if they're not a good worker. So I'm assuming that is his issue with the language here, that this will catch the unforeseen consequences of this initiative would be detrimental to the overall well-being of the gaming industry. But let's hear what he has to say before I get too deep into that.
Will damage all live service games. How would you keep League of Legends in a functional, playable state? You'd have to re-architect the entire game. The game is what is called client-server. So in client-server models, there's a server and there's a client, and all of the math, all of the game, everything happens on the server. The client...
So it's basically exactly what I said. Okay, good. I'm not that stupid. This is nice to know.
Just displays it. And the reason we want to do it that way is so that you can't teleport around and do 1 billion damage. You don't trust the client. You trust the server. The client just displays what it's told, right? So if we wanted to re-architect this, we'd have to take all of that server logic, push it back out into the client, and somehow make that playable in a multiplayer-only video game. That doesn't make sense to me. So this isn't going to work for all games. Why is it calling out all games? And it's really easy to say like, oh, that'll get worked out down the line. But we're dealing with government here. If we're going to be putting up these types of ideas specifically in front of government, we need to be calling out the right issues, especially if you don't have precedent set. Because now you're going to be setting precedent on something that doesn't make any sense with people that may not understand the nuance of our industry, all in the name of...
With people? I mean, that's an understatement. Politicians understanding the nuance of anything. I mean, I was surprised the other day when the president of El Salvador, actually got the economy right. That's how sad the state of politics is. When a politician tells you it's Monday and it's actually like Tuesday, you're surprised. You're like, fuck, you almost got that one. I did not expect him to get that one. Like, it was so close. I could give that to him, right? That's the level of politicians. And you want to trust a politician with the video game industry? Fuck no. No, I have serious problems with the video game industry, but not enough to the point where I would say, let's get this government involved. Because you want to know who is even more incompetent than the video game industry executives? Government. Holy shit.
Saving games. I can't agree with that. So let's go into why this is happening. Right. So why did this start in the first place? What is the specific cases they've called out that are egregious? And they have one. It's The Crew. So action on The Crew. The video game The Crew, published by Ubisoft, was recently destroyed for all players and had a player base of at least 12 million people. Due to the game's size and France's strong consumer protection laws, this represents one of the best opportunities to hold a publisher accountable for this action. If we're successful in charges being pressed against Ubisoft, this can have a ripple effect on the video games industry to prevent publishers from destroying more games. First off, I don't like the idea in this that it has a player base of 12 million people. That is not how long-running games work. There is a large number of people that buy the game, and that player base slowly dwindles off until nobody is playing it anymore. if there's any costs associated with keeping the game.
Yeah, 12 million players? Dude, I will suck a hobo's penis if that game had 12 million active players. I am that certain that the fucking crew did not have 12 million active players. There is no shot.
Online, which this was an online video game, then eventually it costs more to keep it online than it does to keep running it, right? So
you see, this is really, like, I already dislike this just based on the wording here. Because the wording here is misleading. And they're doing it specifically because they know politicians don't have a fucking clue. The wording here, it's 12 million players all over. So across the entirety of the lifespan of the game, it had a grand total of 12 million players. That is misleading. It is misleading. That would be like me putting on my Tinder profile that I have a six-pack. I do have a six-pack. It's somewhere under all of the fucking belly fat. Technically, I'm not lying. I do have a six-pack because there are muscles there, right? You just can't fucking see it. It's the same with these 12 million people. Yes, there are 12 million people. You just can't see them because they're no longer playing this game. That is so misleading. And if they mislead like this, I already distrust everything they're going to do after this.
The cost outweighs the amount of income for it. There are bad business practices that can occur in there. There are companies that will sell a online-only game as a single-player experience and kind of just put it into the TOS and hide it. But not all companies do that. When they do, we should be calling out that specific company, not all companies. So let's take a look at this and find out more about the crew itself. If we pull up their Wikipedia, we can see that the crew was actually created in 2014, which, much to the hatred of all of us oldies on the internet, was 10 years ago. Oh. So this was an online-only racing video game developed by Ubisoft Ivory Tower and Ubisoft Reflections and published by Ubisoft. So all Ubisoft, right? With that in mind, it said it was a scaled-down recreation of the contiguous United States and included both role-playing and large-scale multiplayer elements. So it had a massive multiplayer component to it. It is an online-only service-based game, and they shut it down 10 years later. On March 31st, 2024, Ubisoft shut down the game's servers, rendering the game.
Well, you can already understand why Ubisoft is doing this. Obviously, it's multiplayer. It is large-scale multiplayer. It's probably races against each other. Most of so for example, the speed of the cars would be controlled server side, so that you can't have your car go at fucking the speed of light, thereby just destroying everyone else. So the second you do put that out and you say, okay, now you guys can just play it on your own, how long before people are making cars that go at the speed of light and no one can fucking catch them unless they know how to cheat? You'd be making the game public for absolutely no one because no one wants to fucking play it because cheaters are just cheating their way through the game now. I can see why he's immediately taking issue with this.
Game unplayable, which is normal for live service games. The only thing that I can see in here that could be a problem is if they post it as not an online-only experience. But everything that I found online shows that the game was always marketed as online-only. If you're going to be buying an online-only game, that means it can only run when it's online. And if the servers need to shut down in the future, far in the future, it makes sense to me for the access to that game to be cut if it's online only. If it's a single player experience that has online only functionality specifically just to shut down the game in the future, and the online only doesn't actually add any gameplay functionality, I'd agree with you. That's a shitty business practice, but that's really rare. And in the specific cases where it does happen, we should call out that, not just all games and not all live service games. Further, there's more context to this too. The Crew itself came out in 2014, but it actually had a sequel that came out in 2018, and then it had another sequel that came out in 2023. And if we go to the Crew's SteamDB, which again is not going to be all of the player base for this, it's only going to show the ones who were playing it through Steam. It was on multiple platforms.
That's a lot of players, isn't it?
It did start out with a sizable amount of community, and then it degraded. And it had a major drop-off in 2018, which is the same year that it launched a sequel. This is normal. When a sequel comes out, a lot of the player base, if the sequel doesn't suck, will move over to it. And then the servers effectively die.
Yeah.
You can't run a live service game on this few players. You can't.
You see, here's the other thing that I feel like people should keep in mind. Those servers cost money. If you were to force gaming companies to keep servers up and at infinitum, companies would soon be justified in charging $200-300 per game. Not because that game costs $200-300, it's because all of the fucking servers that they have to keep alive for all of the other games that they're running. Because you're not allowed to kill the game. I personally think asking for that is such a weird thing. Hey, for 5 people? Like, what are you talking about here? Enix did with Marvel Avengers, closed servers, but still be able to play it alone? You could, but this is an online-only game, so playing it alone wouldn't really work, right? Essentially, you have no other choice but to put all of the tools in players' hands because the companies will not run the game if it's not profitable, but the players will. I mean, if this initiative asked for games to go once a game exits or is at the end of its lifespan, the game has to become freeware or the game has to become pirateware, then yeah, that would have been a different argument to me, and that would have probably been something that I would be able to get behind. But because this initiative doesn't ask for that, the initiative says companies should not be allowed to kill games. That is a very different argument, right? Because that immediately suggests then that I may never shut down my servers. So even if it is just one fuck playing this game, I have to have an entire server active for this one guy because he wants to play the game.
Most of the time, especially not if there's anything else that goes into it. And if we go into that anything else, and we could see that there was license problems. So on December 14th, 2023, Ubisoft delisted The Crew and its expansions from digital platforms, suspended sales of microtransactions, and announced that the game's servers would shut down on March 31st. So they gave them 3 months. Usually I would say, hey, 6 months is probably a better deal, but if they're going to do 3 months, they're going to do 3 months. The only thing that I'd be interested outside of that is if there was a contractual obligation to do more than 3 months and they didn't follow it, if it was in the terms of service or not. Citing upcoming server infrastructure and licensing constraints. What were those licensing constraints? Well, it turns out that all of the cars in the game were licensed from the car companies. And a 10-year running game likely means that they had license to them for 10 years. And that means that it would likely reopen for negotiation. Now, understand that's speculation, but I've seen this type of a deal many times in the industry while I've been working in it. So it's not...
I wouldn't say it's speculation. If you have a BMW in the game, you bet your ass BMW is going to be like, well, actually, if you want to use the BMW, we need you to pay for that. And now you have Ubisoft going, dude, what the fuck? We have one person playing this game. We have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars getting all of these licensing fees just up and running again for this one guy. No. We don't think we want to do that.
Not unlikely. If you're going to have to renegotiate on a game that has so few players and is not turning a profit anymore, you're probably just going to forego the renegotiation. And if those servers are aging, you're not going to want to recreate that infrastructure. And there are some people that'll say, well, just make it all single player. Well, I've explained that doesn't make any sense in the first place. If you're making it all single player, you'd have to carve off all of that, and it's developer time.
Not only that, I do think if you are going to make it all single player, you'll probably still run into licensing issues. These car companies are still going to go, dude, what the fuck? You don't have the licensing agreement with us, at least, that suggests that you're allowed to make this game single player for all eternity. Your licensing agreement with us was for only X amount of years. That expires now. If you want to do it again, you're going to have to pay for it again.
Money, when you already have...
Because remember, Ubisoft didn't enter into a single player licensing agreement with them, where the game would just always be around, because what the fuck are you going to do? Recently, there was a problem with it was a few months ago now, but I think there was a problem with Metal Gear Solid on Steam, where all of the Metal Gear Solid games had to be pulled from Steam, and if I'm not mistaken, it was because of a copyright issue, music copyright. They had licensed a deal for songs to be used, and then those songs could not be they had problems with the renegotiation of the use of the songs in the games, and so the games had to be pulled from if I'm not mistaken, that's what happened. I could be misremembering, but that's what happened. So they had to pull it while they were sorting out the licensing agreement for the songs in the games, so that they could re-upload the game so that people could purchase it again. This is something that happens all the time, and that's a single-player game, right? So you can imagine why companies wouldn't want to do that.
Sequels out and the game has basically no players left anyway, it makes more sense to just move on. I don't find that to be a problem from the developer perspective, and I understand that people find that to be a problem from the player perspective. These are two different ideologies, and that's okay to have two different ideologies. I just won't agree with it because I understand the burden that puts if we raise that problem in the way that we are right now. If you try to tell me that every studio needs to run their live service game indefinitely or not want to run one at all, then no one's going to run them. And we're going to miss out on adventures like Final Fantasy XIV. And even though I don't play anymore, League of Legends or any other live service game, any of them. You're talking everything, like even phone games, as funny as that is. A lot of people don't realize that phone games require online-only activity. What about things like Pokemon Go? What about stuff like Monster Hunter Now? What about any of these? We'd never get any of them. And that's why I think this needs to not be vague. It needs to be specific about the business practice it's trying to defeat, which is specifically companies that are doing this under the guise of it being a single-player game, but adding online-only functionality that is not necessary. And
I would say the other thing that I would call out on this is games like Anthem, where you have a publisher that makes it very clear, we're going to put this game out there. We're going to keep updating it. This is our next big push. The game launches. It's terrible. No one wants to fucking play it. And now you have a bunch of people that bought the game, spent money on the game, bought assets of the game because they thought this was going to be the next big game. And then EA basically comes out and says, fuck it. It's over. We're stopping all production on the game. That is the kind of practices that I think should be attacked here. That is the kind of stuff that we should be going after. Not this, because this makes no sense. Let's evolve again.
Doesn't add any gameplay elements. That's the problem. So now we're going to go to Ross, otherwise known as Accursed Farms, the creator of this initiative, and one of the ones that's pushing it the most online. I'm going to let him say exactly why he thinks that this will go through very easily and why it is important, and then I'm going to tell you why I don't agree with it.
Comes law in the EU? Yeah, it might be. Now, it's not a guarantee, but I think if we get the signatures, this passes. Why do I say that? Well, it's a few factors. Politicians like easy wins, and this does
such a good take. Politicians do like easy wins, but this would not be an easy win. The amount of lawsuits that would follow from this, the amount of people that would challenge this would be ridiculous.
Doesn't require them to do much at all. And unless it involves gambling or protecting children, politicians generally don't care about video games. So this isn't of big consequence to them or most of their constituencies.
I'm going to stop it there for a moment. The assertion that politicians just like easy wins, so this legislation will go through, but the politicians don't care about a multi-billion-dollar global industry and that it doesn't matter to their constituencies is incredibly absurd to me. I don't think this is the right direction at all for a movement like this. I think it's incredibly...
He looks like he was the one guy playing the crew. I don't want to make fun of a guy's looks, but he looks like he was that guy playing the crew, and that's why he's butthurt at the moment.
Damaging, and it makes our entire industry look bad, both on the player side and the developer side. If we're going to be putting forward anything that may eventually turn into legislation, it should be passing because it's the right thing to do for consumers and developers, and that there's some kind of a middle ground, not just because it's an easy win and politicians don't care. This sets us off on a completely wrong foot.
Not only that, it doesn't think about the repercussions of the thing that you're trying to push. It's always important to look at the unforeseen consequences of the actions of political interference. And as I've already discussed in this video multiple fucking times, and Pirate Software has discussed, the unforeseen consequences of this initiative would be astronomically bad for pretty much everyone involved.
EU law is already unclear on a lot of this practice anyway.
And that's dangerous. If we're going to be setting precedent, which could change the way that law works all the way down the road, then we need to be sending the right message, which this is sending a vague message that doesn't cover the actual problem. So this is not a win to me. This is a huge risk.
And we would be making it easy for them to settle it. It falls in line with other consumer practices. You know how when you buy something, you're generally allowed to keep it?
In the case of live service games, in the terms of service for those, you are not buying the game. You're buying a license to the game. And that's the part that's really different here. If we don't like the idea of live service games as a whole, I get it. Don't play live service games then. Don't agree to those terms. But if we're under this weird idea that we need to get rid of all live service games or damage that practice in any way to keep in line with consumer policies, it is in line with consumer policies. If it wasn't, it wouldn't be there in the first place. So this doesn't...
To be fair, Acedia, I hate when people use the digital games thing as you don't own your games because it's digital. To me, the problem that I have with that argument is you also didn't own your game back when games were physical. I remember when World of Warcraft first came out, I even have the physical box for World of Warcraft games, right? That I bought years ago. Did I own this any more than I do today? No. I owned it for as long as the servers stay up, right? The second the servers go down for the game, I no longer really own the game. I can install it on my non-existing fucking CD-ROM, but it would still not be playable because the servers would be down. Digital games are exactly the same as physical games in that way. If you have a game that is offline only, the only way you will ever lose access to that game is if the internet dies, right? Because even if the publisher somehow decided to pull that game from Steam and Steam agreed with that, you could just pirate the fucking thing. It would be out on pirate sites pretty much the next day, and you'd be able to play it again. So fundamentally, you own it about as much as you used to own it. So I'm not in agreement that digital games is the is the idea here. I think they're talking even earlier than that, though, like Nintendo games and shit. Yeah, if you're talking about games pre the internet or pre-servers, then yeah, sure, you own the physical. But I would argue if you look at Steam, for example, Steam will not remove access to single-player games at all. And they've said this multiple times over. They will not remove your access to games. So I don't know what else what else can you say, right?
Really make a lot of sense to me. You're not buying the game, you're buying a license to the game. In the niche cases where a studio is trying to sell a game as if you are buying it or purchasing it or using that language specifically and they give you a live service game instead, I agree that should change. That language should change. You are not purchasing the game, you are not buying the game, you are paying to have a license to a live service experience. I get that. Is that what this is doing though? The initiative is not trying to call that out specifically. It's trying to say that all...
Jack, I don't agree with that. I don't think he exposed himself at all. Thus far, I have agreed with literally everything he said because I fundamentally agree that there is a problem. I think the solution to the problem is a bigger problem. And it's very important that if we are going to come up with a solution, that the solution doesn't create an even bigger problem on the other side of things. Now, if you want to call me a corporate shell, you're welcome to do so. I don't take money from any companies, and I have never. So, it is what it is. But I don't believe that he is a corporate shell, and I agree with the things that he's saying here. Look him up. He's a co-founder with a publisher that wants to make live service games. Yeah, but no. Well, he's a co-founder. Like, what's the problem with live service games, though? His points, I don't care about what he's involved in. I'm listening to his reasons given for why he is opposed to this bill. What you need to think about, Jack, is, and you can watch the video in its entirety to get all of my thoughts on this, but you need to think about what happens to games the second this law passes. Every single multiplayer game dies instantly. Every company that has ever even attempted to make a live service or multiplayer game stops immediately because no one wants to be stuck having to run servers for one person because one fuck wants to play the game. The language of this bill or of this initiative is just completely wrong.
All games need to stay in a functional, playable state, which is not calling out the language that is being used to manipulate the player. Call that out specifically, not this vague bullshit.
And finally, this is a diversion from really serious topics that politicians would prefer not to deal with.
That's really gross to me as well. The idea that this is just a diversion from serious topics and they can get an easy win in and we can just push it through and there won't be a lot of pushback on it and they're not going to have to think about it too hard. That's crazy dangerous, dude. If you're going to be setting precedent, if you're going to be putting forward some...
Yeah, but Hobo Apple, what I understand from Pirate Software is that he has no problem with the idea behind the initiative. He has a problem with the language of the initiative. And while you might say, wow, this initiative is just to get the conversation started, it would be very helpful if the conversation starts in the right way. Because this isn't it. The conversation here is going to go very wrong very quickly.
Something that you want to start a conversation to eventually become legislation, and these are the reasons for it, not only can I not agree with the initiative, but I can't agree with you. And I think that the tactics that you're using here are really disgusting. So yes, I won't agree with that, and I won't agree with Ross. There's no way around that. I think this is gross. To sum it all up,
Jack, when you say WoW private servers are not valid, they've never been valid. They've never been valid. The only reason most private servers are up and running and don't close down is because a lot of them are hosted in Russia, where Blizzard fundamentally struggles to get them to close down. But they've never been valid. Blizzard doesn't allow for private servers to run because it steals their money, right? They make the game, they put out consistent development of the game, and then someone else comes around and just takes the game for themselves. They've never been valid. And the argument that they should be valid, I would like to hear, why do you think they should be valid? Why do you think a private server for World of Warcraft is allowed? I would love to hear your reasoning there.
No, I will not be supporting the initiative Stop Killing Games. You're not going to change my mind on it because I find this language to be incredibly vague and damaging to the rest of our industry. I think that it will be bad for both developers and players down the line in the way that it is currently written. And I think that starting a conversation that doesn't get to the core of the issue is both wasted time and leads to potentially bad outcomes. So if we want to talk about this, let's talk about the actual bad business practices. In the case that a studio is making a live service game and they sell it to you as a product, they say that you are purchasing the game or you are buying the game, when in reality you're actually purchasing or buying a license to that game. I think that we should be fighting about that. That needs to go away. A player should be well informed at the point of purchase that they are purchasing a license, not buying a game. And the reason that we have those licenses in the case of client-server interactions, like we had before, we're talking about client-server games, is so that they can ban you when you cheat at them. They revoke your license. That's why they revoke your license, to protect the gameplay of every other player that you're impacting when you cheat at these games. That needs to exist, but it needs to be...
Yeah, it needs to be more out there, and people need to know what they're paying for, right? Pushing this malicious agenda of you don't pay for the game, you pay for the experience, where he tells customers that after the experience is ended, you just buy game 2.0. Jack, that's not at all what he did. I'm not sure if you were listening to him, but that's not at all what he said. The point he's making here is actually, it makes sense, right? For example, take World of Warcraft. When you buy World of Warcraft, what are you buying? As Thor just explained here, you're buying license to access the servers. You're not buying the game. The game doesn't belong to you. The game belongs to Blizzard. Why is that important? Why is that distinction important? I'll explain. When you play Sims 1, for example, Thom1, 22 months, part of the Regeneration, appreciate you, fam. Thank you, thank you, thank you. When you play Sims 1, for example, and you enter the cheat code that gives you unlimited money, you're allowed to do that. It's your game. The cheat is literally built into the game because you own the game. You bought it. If you owned World of Warcraft, you would be allowed to increase your damage by 400%. You own the game. You're allowed to do whatever the fuck you want in that game. And because you own the game, Blizzard would not be able to take that game away from you. They wouldn't be able to ban you because, well, you own the game. It's your game, and you're not allowed to take someone's property. So the only way Blizzard can enforce the rules is by saying you don't own the game, you only own access to the game. And we can revoke that access if you break the rules. You have to have that, because if you don't have that, you're kind of fucked. Right? because now you can't ban anyone for any egregious actions or anything that they do. Where I agree with this initiative, and what I would love to see from this initiative, if they could just change the wording of it, I would say, if you are a gaming company and you're bringing out a game like an online-only game, you need to have in your terms of service that at end of life, so the second the game reaches end of life, that game must become freeware. So now the game becomes available for everyone to play and to do with whatever the fuck they want, because the game is dead. The official servers are no longer up and running. The game is now in the hands of the people. And then people can decide, do they want to set up a separate private server for the game? Or what exactly do they want to do with the game so that the game can continue to be playable for those people that loved the game? But the way the wording is currently, it will force companies to keep the servers running no matter what. So even if there are no players playing the game, or maybe one person a month playing the game, the servers must be always on because they're not allowed to close those games. So you will run into experiences where companies are now charging hundreds of dollars for a game because they know they're going to have to run this fucking game for the rest of time, effectively. You pay for the experience, are his literal words from his stream on Twitch. Yeah, but Jack, I have often said a phrase on Twitch where when I remake the video, so I actually now record the video, I think of how to better express that phrase. So him saying you pay for the experience of playing the game is literally the same as saying you're purchasing the license to access the game. It's the same thing. The one is just more colloquially said because, you're just speaking to chat now. But when you're making a video and you have time to think about it, you go, okay, wait, that could be perceived wrong by people, so I should explain it better. I'm not going to punish him on that because I have said things on stream where afterwards I think about it and I go, man, some people are going to take that the wrong way. I should have explained it better. And then if I were to record a video, I will explain it better. To bankrupt your competition, just keep logging into their date games. Pretty much. Remember, the one thing that you have to understand, and I think if I understand Thor correctly, now it is possible that I'm misunderstanding Thor, and Jack, you are absolutely understanding him correctly. So I am taking what I think Thor is saying, and I agree with what I think he is saying. But what I will say is politicians and political elements or political implementation isn't surgical. Politicians are not scalpels. They're hammers. A politician comes in and they fix a thing, just bam. There, we fixed it. Okay? Politicians rarely, if ever, think about what happens now with this fix. What is our fix killing? So it is important when you ask politicians to fix something that you are very specific about what are you asking them to fix. What is your exact problem that you need fixing? The problem here is that what he wants fixed is way too fucking vague and broad. It's like a massive window of things that need to be fixed. And you can almost imagine politicians just going, yep, companies are not allowed to close games that they sell. Well, there's a whole bunch of problems with that, right? That is a very bad law. Goes back to Ubisoft, attempt to delete libraries. If purchase isn't ownership, then piracy isn't theft. Jack, I mean, this specific debate goes back to the crew thing. Right? Now, if we're going to include all of the things that Ubisoft did, I would need to go back and check what exactly was it that Ubisoft were trying to do. I can't comment on something that I do not know, right? But if you're saying if purchase isn't ownership, then piracy isn't theft, in principle, I absolutely agree with you 100%. I have said that phrase many times myself. That being said, though, we also have to think about the problems that we're trying to solve. As I've already explained to you, if you have a game like World of Warcraft, if you sold the game to players. In other words, when you buy World of Warcraft, you now own the game. Suddenly, Blizzard cannot ban you from the game because it is physically illegal to take someone's property away. So if you own the game, then I cannot ban you from the game. No matter what I do, no matter what you do, I cannot ban you. So then, all of those gold farmers that are farming the fuck out of the game and flooding the auction house can't be stopped. You can't take it away from them. If you then suddenly go into a raid with another player, and this player wrote a code that ninjas all of the loot and gives him all of the loot all the time, you can't ban that player. You can't get rid of that player. They own that game. It's their game. And no matter what you do, you're fucked because this person owns the game. You own the game too, but the only way you can fight this person is by also coding and cheating. So you run into issues. So the only way to get around those issues is to create this sort of, gray zone, to use part of CCS law words here, to create this gray zone of saying, no, you don't purchase the game, you purchase access to the game. That's why we charge you the subscription service. Is you can play the game as long as we determine you're allowed to play the game. And it is to make sure that people don't cheat and people don't break the game. And if they do, they can get banned.
Better informed to the player at time of purchase. So I agree on that. This doesn't bring that up, though. It just attacks all video games that have online-only components and says that they need to keep being able to be played indefinitely. That doesn't make any sense to me. Aside from that, a lot of people really like live service games as they exist now. So trying to kill off all live service games, as some people have said online, doesn't make any sense either. Live service games are a great way to get away from the real world. They are about social interaction between players. Some people get married in them. Some people met their spouse in them and then got married in them. It's a really cool thing for a point in time in which you're having that social experience. And to destroy that just because you don't like them is very weird. I don't think that makes a lot of sense to me. I also don't think it makes sense the way that
Jack, you see, but there, I don't agree with Ubisoft at all. And there, I do agree that the fact that Ubisoft reversed it probably means Ubisoft checked with their lawyers and their lawyers said, yeah, we're going to get into trouble here. We're not allowed to delete people's libraries. So that I absolutely agree with, right? And on that front, on that and that alone, I would be 100% on your side. But this specific thing is a separate issue.
That Ross is posing this is why it's going to pass. I think that's incredibly inflammatory and could lead to a lot of damage to both what he's trying to stop and to games as a whole. To say that the government just doesn't care and this is an easy win and we're going to get it through is disingenuous. You're talking about a multi-billion-dollar global industry. To think that the government isn't going to be meticulously looking through this and looking for flaws and holes is absurd. So I don't think that's honest at all, and I find it disgusting. So for everyone who's mad about that, fine. Be angry about it. I'm not going to change my stance on that because I can't agree with this, both as a dev and a player. I see the danger involved, I see the vagueness in the language, and it doesn't make sense to me. If we want to fight for better conditions for players, then fight the actual problem. Don't make new ones.
All right, what is the some grant that we don't lose access a year after the game launches and pocket the dollars? Z Vengeance, what I would say is I wouldn't want a law that forces companies to keep games open and running. Because again, it would create massive problems, as Avedon just explained there. The problem with that law would mean that if, for example, you're EA and you launched Anthem and Anthem is going terribly as it did, now you're forced to run the game for the next year, even though the game isn't making any fucking money. Right? The game is just losing money the whole time. What I would say, and this is the law that I would want to see, is if you promised a game, if you made a game, and that game gets cancelled, right, before your promise ends, you refund people the game. So you put an arbitrary number on there. In other words, if the game runs for anything less than 2 years or whatever, or you break your consumer promise. Actually, this is what I would say. If you break your consumer promise, so in other words, if you tell players this is going to be an online game It's going to run for the next 10 years. We're going to do 4 expansions. If you cancel that game without doing your 4 expansions, you refund players all of the money that they spent on that game. Every last fucking cent of it. It would force companies to stop making stupid promises and actually just go, you know what? We don't know how long this game is going to run for. We hope for long, right? We hope for long, but we don't know. Because basically there, all you're doing is you're punishing a studio that overpromises and underdelivers. And I would be okay with that, right? This discussion should be changed to WoW-related ones so people can understand arguments from both sides better. Jack, I mean, even if you talk about WoW, people will not understand the arguments from any side better. You're dealing with the internet here. People actively try to not understand what people are saying. I have learned, I've been on the internet long enough to know people don't try to understand things.